where we are discussing tough situations. That's the letter C, which stands for conflict. This series is sponsored by the National Cooperative Procurement Partners, the professional association for cooperative procurement, as it relates to all things cooperative. NCPP has taken a leadership role by guiding the discussion and education on procurement best practices in cooperative purchasing, as well as collaboration efforts to bring all the stakeholders together to solve real procurement issues. All of these listed here, the strategic suppliers and cooperative partners, have contributed to make this free webinar series possible for our public procurement professionals. Their membership allows for these webinars and our brand new roadmap to be free and available for the public procurement community. I'm Tammy Rimes, former purchasing agent for the City of San Diego and moderator for this series. So first off, I want to start today by saying thank you. Thank you for your service. And indeed, it is a service that we provide to our customer departments, to our suppliers, and to all the communities in which we also reside. No one truly understands what a procurement team has to deal with, except maybe another procurement team. And as a former purchasing agent who sat in that chair, I'm the first to admit it was one of the most difficult and stressful jobs that I ever had. But it's also one of the most rewarding and exciting. And when I ask the question when I'm speaking at procurement conferences, what's the best part of your job? One of the top answers is, it never gets boring. Unfortunately, part of that excitement is due to conflict, because on any given day, something can go wrong or it needs to be fixed. Whether there's protests on contract awards, there's problems when getting that bid out on the street, we have computer glitches, supplier complaints, and then throw in a little bit of political drama in our own organizations, and that definitely adds gray to our black and white world of public procurement, as well as possibly gray to our hairlines. But the good news, conflict is where we excel. We are rock stars at finding solutions, and we make it work. And when we deal with these so-called gray areas, it's not whether our decisions are right or wrong, but can we defend them? When handling a protest situation and writing out the documentation for your decision, or you're up before that board and you're having to present a new initiative or regulation, we got to know our stuff. And most importantly, be able to defend and clarify our position to our management, to the media, and also in all those public information requests. So for procurement, it might make us a bit more cautious, pragmatic, and yeah, I would say even a little bit paranoid, but that's okay, because we are the department that gets it done, and we keep our organization out of the news and out of trouble. So today I'm proud to interview some other procurement leaders as in-the-know procurement professionals who have handled a wide range of issues within their own operations. And they're here today to share their knowledge and expertise with us. So that leads us to this third topic of the webinar series, calming the rough seas, conflict. So we're going to go up the coastline from where I live, San Diego, up to the county of Sacramento. Craig Rader serves as the purchasing agent for the county, and he just completed his one-year presidency of CAPPO, the California Association of Public Purchasing Officials. The sold-out conference was hosted just last month and was one of the most successful conferences in that association's history. Thanks, Craig, for joining us today.
Thank you, Tammy.
So during your tenure as president of CAPPO, one of your main focuses and a huge amount of attention went toward training. So training was a big mission for its members. And
Yes.
You actually attended some of those trainings. So based on your experience, what did you find to be what I call pinch points or problem areas that public procurement folks are experiencing nowadays?
Okay, so yes, Tammy, you're correct. One of my main goals when I became president of CAPPO in 2016 was to increase the training for our membership. And the previous year, we had about a little over 600 of our members go through training. And my goal for my year was to bump that number up to 1,000. And I'm happy to report that we had close to 1,100 people, or 200 members, go through training in the 2016-17 fiscal year. So it was fantastic. My team really hit the ball out of the park. I attended as much training and chapter events as I could during my year as president. And one thing I really came to light, I kind of knew it, but it really kind of came to light when I was going to the trainings or visiting the chapters, is the people in our profession are very engaged. They're eager to learn. Our demographics are rapidly changing, and they're thirsty for information. But there's some pain points. I think one of the pain points that I saw was we're responsible for knowing so much. We have so many laws, regulations, statutes, codes that dictate or give us a framework on what we can do and how we can do it. And knowing all that information is challenging because there are so many. And time. We're all very busy. Our resources are stretched very thin for the past couple of years, and it's having the time, taking the time out of your busy schedule, because we're always putting out fires, right? And carving that time to dedicate to education so that when these things do come up, these challenges come up, or these problems come up, you've got the tools in your toolkit to hopefully address them and address them quickly.
Right, right. Well, congratulations on that number. That's huge. So moving on to your real job at this county of Sacramento. As the purchasing agent there, it's one of the largest counties in the state, as well as you have the complications. It's also the seat of the state's capital. So do you ever experience issues in coordinating with both the state as well as the city of Sacramento, since your jurisdictions all sometimes overlap? And are there ways that you've been able to manage that overlap for better coordination of services?
Yes, occasionally we run into some issues, but primarily the issues that we run into, it's just our busy schedules. It's not the ability or willingness for other agencies to come together and collaborate on projects. It's most of the issues we've kind of struggled with have been time and resources. Some of the things that we've done to better collaborate with other agencies is there's a couple things. There's we have an agency in Sacramento called SACOG, which is the Sacramento area or Sacramento Council of Government Agencies, and we've been leveraging that entity to help us develop co-op contracts. We last year or the year before we did a regional co-op contract for fuel and lubricants. This year we're banding together. And it's kind of ironic, the season that we've got and that we're going through right now with all the flooding and stuff, is we've also banded together to look at developing some regional debris removal and emergency contracts. Unfortunately, they're not in place yet. We're in the planning stages of those as we're going through an emergency. But at least we're working on it. We're collaborating with SACOG, and they're kind of taking the lead for these regional co-op contracts. Another thing that we've been doing for about 10 years is the city, the county, our local utility district, our local transit district, the state of California, some of our chambers. We came together about 10 years ago and formed this group called SACPAC, which is the Sacramento Area Public Agency Consortium. It's not a formal group or formal entity. It's just us contracting folks from regional government agencies where we get together and we plan educational events for the vendor community. And how can we educate the vendors to engage with government? Because a lot of stuff that we do is very similar, but there are certain things that are unique to each agency. Right. So, and we've one of the big things that this group does, and we've done for the past 10 years, is we put on it's not a full day. It's like maybe a 3/4 day event where it's a reverse trade show. And we typically have about 70 to 75 agencies with a booth. So it's the cities, the counties, the special districts, state agencies all have a booth, and we invite the vendors to come in, and it's contracting folks. It's the purchasing guys and gals. Right. We're there, so we can engage with the vendor community, bring them in, and kind of teach them how to engage with us, how to register through our website, all that kind of stuff. How do we buy things? Do we use a P card? Do we have term contracts? But how do we buy the stuff that they sell and have that face time with us? And while that trade show is going on, we will also have workshops. So the workshops will be on different topics like using social media to enhance their business, go through government laws and all the statutes that dictate how we do things. Go and kind of explain that to them, why it's maybe so difficult to deal with government. So we kind of break that down and explain that to them, why this is why we do things the way that we do it. And that's been very, very successful. I think at the height of this annual event, a couple of years ago, we had, I think, close to 900 vendors attend.
Wow,
and
that's
we started
amazing.
The first year, we had like less than 100.
Wow, that is amazing. And plus, it's a huge benefit for the vendors because it's kind of one-stop shop, and they get to meet a whole bunch of people.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you brought up vendors, so that's the segue to the next question. In our role as procurement, on any given day, we receive a call, and it's a call from a customer department, and unfortunately, they're complaining about a vendor. And in purchasing's perspective, we have to represent the organization, but we have to be neutral. So when you get that call, what are some of the questions that you ask or the steps that you first take to start to address the issue?
Now, usually the first thing I ask when I answer my call and find out it's an internal customer, I usually ask them the question, what can I do for you or how can I help you? Because
Right.
we are a service organization, and we don't provide products. We provide a service to our internal customers and also our external customers, the vendor base.
Right.
But I want to know, okay, what can I do for you? Kind of find out what they're asking for, what problem do they have, what's their desired solution, right? We might not be able to meet that, but find out what are they trying to do, what problem are they trying to solve, and then within my resources, if I have to say no, a lot of times in procurement we need to tell our customers, no, we can't do that. But if I have to say no, I back it up with why I can't. I can't do what you're asking me to do, and this is why I can't. But you should also have, this is what I can do for you. You're asking for A, I can't do A, but I can do B, I can do C, and I can do D. My recommendation might be C, but these are the options that you have. And being able to come to the plate with options for them, I think is critical.
Perfect, perfect. So many suppliers, when they go through the bid process, and obviously they're disappointed when they didn't get a contract, I encourage this, and many of them ask for this, for a debrief session. So when you have a vendor or contractor come in, how do you handle those sessions so that they're proactive and they're meaningful for that supplier?
Yeah, for the most part, we only are proactive for our larger procurements or the ones that might have high visibility that might, we expect there might be an issue. So we'll kind of pre-plan those. That's going to be actually part of the timeline of the procurement process. Well, we'll tell them, this is when we intend to do the intent to award. This is when we're going to do the debriefing. It's your opportunity to kind of come in and get more of the details of how we made our decision. But that doesn't happen with everything, unfortunately, because we manage about 1,200 contracts here, so we just don't have the resources to do it for every procurement. However, if a vendor does ask, we do provide them that opportunity. We use an e-procurement system, so they have access to most of the data themselves online, but sometimes it's difficult, especially with an RFP, when we're doing very complex evaluations and weighting things and scoring them, and then do we do like an average score or do a consensus score, and just kind of having them better understand how we went through that process and made the decision. We'll bring them in, and typically it's a face-to-face meeting if they're local. If not, we can obviously do it over the phone with a conference call, but we try to bring them in face-to-face whenever possible to kind of show them this is what we did, this is how we did it, this is why we did it this way, and that really helps. I think it's very critical and very helpful to help minimize protests. It's not going to be the panacea for making sure you don't get a protest, but it's definitely going to help.
Right. So it's good that you do that. I haven't heard that before, that somebody just puts it in as part of the process. That's awesome. So my last question for you is, in the case where stuff goes wrong, and it often does in a large organization, how do you plan for that, and does cooperative procurement contracts ever fit into that plan or solution?
Well, unfortunately, we can't plan for everything that might go wrong, but we do plan for the stuff that there's a high probability that might occur. Again, example is the current floods that we're going through right now. So we'll plan for EOC and other events that we know is a high probability of happening. So we'll have contingency contracts or a backup plan, a plan B, in case something kind of goes wrong. But for the normal day-to-day stuff that just happens, we really don't. But we do have tools available to us, like the co-op contracts, to help us in those events. And I've seen co-ops are becoming more widely used. Hopefully, sometimes it's going to also save us money, but not always. But I always tell my folks, too, that when you're looking at the analysis and maybe looking at a co-op contract to use, and don't just be comparing the price that we're currently paying to the price on the co-op. You know, that is one indicator of whether it's best for us to use, but also factor in how much staff time it takes for us to get that contract in place. You know, are we discounting a co-op contract because we're going to pay an extra 50 cents, and that 50 cents per widget is going to equate to $10,000 a year, when it costs us $50,000 a year or $50,000 to go through the procurement process, right? Factor everything. Don't just kind of hone in on the price. Factor in the whole process and how much it costs us to go through the whole process to get that contract in place, and also to manage that contract once it is in place.
Right. Right. No, that's great that you're looking at the whole picture.
That, you know, hopefully will free us to concentrate on more value-added, more mission-critical contracts.
Perfect. Great. Well, great answer. And I need you to stay on the line, Craig, because those are in the audience. You're welcome to ask questions. On the right-hand side of your panel of the screen, there is an opportunity for you to ask questions. So when we go through all our panelists, there's going to be an opportunity at the end that I'll try to take some of those questions as well. So now we're going to move across the country all the way to Virginia, to a university, Old Dominion University in Virginia. And Harry Smithson handles all kind of procurement, and I've seen him conduct some great training sessions on the topic of conflict. He's handled complex projects and constructions, and is actually one of the best I've seen in conflict management. So welcome, Harry. Harry, you might have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Harry. So you're a little unique in a university. Oh, you're welcome. You're a little unique in a university setting because you have circumstances of student enrollment, tenured professors and researchers, and then there's the college sports teams, and people get pretty intense about that. Is there any additional pressure or specific issues for your procurement team operating in that type of environment?
I'm going to have to say yes. At times, it's certainly different from a municipal setting, and we have two sides. We have an administrative side and an academic side, and it's been very easy for our team to get buy-in from the administrative side, management top down, because we can show how we add value every day with the types of services and programs and initiatives that we undertake on a daily basis. The struggle for us is the academic side, because professors are a little bit different. They're very unique, and they want something when they want it, and they don't care how they get it. So what we focus on for the academic side is continued, consistent communication and outreach to let them know that we're here to help you, and that if you just turn to us early on in a process and let us know what's going on, we can guide you down the right path. And we're turning the ship slowly on that side of the campus, but we do have some colleges that have come on board, and they absolutely understand that we do add value. So things are getting a lot better with the academic community.
Good, good. So your team is really active, and you're an active member of VASCUP, which stands for the Virginia Association of State College and University Purchasing Professionals. And so that you get together to purchase cooperatively. So you've created some cooperative contracts that are unique to Virginia and your university systems. So what benefits have you experienced on using this structure to serve the needs of your organizations?
Well, I think there's a commonality between all of the VASCUP schools, in that we have two significant objectives. One is to provide the essential resources and services for the students, and to, at the same time, maintain the fiduciary steward of taxpayer dollars. And there have been instances where we would like to do a cooperative, but because our hierarchies at the colleges or our business models or our philosophies on procurement may not align,
Right.
we aren't able to do that. But there are many, many agreements out there where we have collectively entered into cooperative agreements that have certainly benefited not only the students, but the entire campus community, including faculty and staff. So it is a unique organization, but we don't always see eye to eye. But when we do, the outcomes are pretty significant and beneficial to everybody.
Awesome. So moving on to your level, you have a specific expertise in the area of construction and project management, which can be some of the most complicated and tough procurement assignments. Can you share some tips on what makes a project successful, and if you've had problems in the past, how do you address them head on?
In Virginia, the preferred method for procuring construction services is competitive sealed bidding. And over the past several years, we continue to use competitive sealed bidding for smaller construction ground-up projects and renovations. But over the past several years, I'm going to say since 2010, 2011, we've transitioned our larger projects to CM at risk, which can be procured through competitive negotiations or an RFP process. And it's a great process, and the things that you need to do to make that completely successful is, A, you have to have an individual on your procurement staff that has the professional knowledge and experience of construction and the processes, and also understand the needs and requirements of the university. Secondly, you have to surround yourself with a team that is going to go through an evaluation process that also understands the needs of the university, but also understands the limitations that they may come upon during the process, because the RFP process is a very, very subjective process for the most part. There are only a couple of objective components to it. So getting these individuals on board and getting them to understand why it's important that they follow the rules and the process to ensure a successful contractor selection. In the beginning it was tough, but I think we've gotten so much better over the years, because we actually have a policy or a procedure in place that now says, A, you cannot have, the owner agency, the requester, cannot have more than 50% of the committee or more than 50% participation on the committee for the selection of any A&E or any construction contractor. Secondly, we cap that out at a maximum of 7 individuals to participate, which I think really, really bodes well for our process and how things have worked out over the years. And the other thing is, you got to make sure that your procurement lead on that project is actually a voting member, because if they're not a voting member and they're not in tune with the requirements and the responses from the contractors, then I think that the organization would be doing the campus community or any agency a disservice. Now,
Right.
One of the things that I really want to real quickly talk about is we did have problems in the past where we hadn't quite streamlined our process. So when we would get responses, whether it was construction or other non-professional services, we would let the committee members see the pricing. Well, the pricing, it influences how individuals score, because if it's over budget, then the vendors typically get scored lower, and if it's under budget, they would typically get scored higher. It would skew the committee members. So what we've done is we've got a procedure in place where we don't share the scores with anybody on the evaluation committee until after we get all their scores in. So it's made for a better process and better contractor selection.
So I have to ask you the tough question, because sometimes things go wrong in construction or project management. Have you ever had the tough task of having to debar a contractor, or had to go through depositions or testify in court on a contract dispute? And if you did, were there any lessons learned?
Not me personally. I have been on the peripheral for both processes. I have found over the years that the debarment process, it's painstakingly long. Yeah. And one of the things that we have done recently, because we have an incident that we're going through right now, is we've added language in our solicitation documents that basically state if any bidder has done business with Old Dominion University in the past 10 years, and or any of the bidders' principals have done business with Old Dominion University in the past 10 years, either as an individual or a principal in another company, regardless, they have to put Old Dominion University down as a reference. And they have to list the specific projects, and then we will use those projects and those references when we do the evaluation. So if they default, it's not going to bode well. And we're actually going through a default termination process right now. We're working with the surety. This project started in November of 2015, and today it's February 22nd, 2017, and we still don't have a roof on a building, and it's just one of those little small projects, and it's been a nightmare.
Wow.
$650,000 nightmare. So the small projects are the ones that get you.
Oh, I know. So during a trip to Virginia, I actually got to meet the members of your procurement team at Old Dominion. And you're an amazing group of folks. However, I have to admit that you all are very, very different from one another in skill sets, personalities, even tenure in the procurement role. But despite those differences, I felt like your team worked very well together. Can you share your team's secret on how being so different yet working so well together?
Well, I think, first of all, we're so small, we have to get along because we each have to have and play multiple roles. We've got 11 individuals in our office who have combined over 175 years of procurement experience, but what's interesting is over 100 years here at ODU. So there's not a lot of turnover in our office. And we've been fortunate over the past few years to have incredible management within our organization, and we currently have a new director who is just fantastic. She provides the guidance and the everyday skill sets to make us succeed. So what we have is, collectively as a group, members of this office truly embrace collaborative, inclusive, proactive, professionalism, team. We work so well together, and we have an open door policy. So anyone that wants to come in and make a suggestion on any topic, regardless, their voice is going to be heard. And this is not a timid group. We are a very, very vocal.
No, you're
group.
not. I would vouch for that. You're very vocal, but you all work very well.
But we do. We each have our own unique assets and points of view, but everybody is value added whenever we get around the table, and we actually like each other outside of work. So I think that helps. That helps as well.
Sure, that's awesome. Well, I am going to, as I asked Craig, if you can stay on the line, because we're going to circle back with some more questions toward the end, Harry, but I appreciate your insight from a university perspective. So now, folks, we're going to head way northwest to the state of Alaska. We've invited Jason Soza, the Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Alaska. He has a rich procurement background and was just newly elected as a director at large for NASPO, the National Association of State Procurement Officials. So thanks, Jason, for joining us today.
No problem.
So I have to ask, I know you get this all the time, what's the temperature in Alaska today?
Today I think we're looking at about 25 degrees, so not as cold as it could be.
No. So located in the state of Alaska, you're geographically separated by what you call the lower 48 states. So from that perspective, what do you have to consider or think about as a CPO for a somewhat isolated large state that might be different than another state CPO or jurisdiction?
You know, really it's just the vast distance between places, right? It's not just that we're all the maps of the U.S., you know, they show Alaska down in the Gulf of Mexico, and I really wish we were there sometimes. But honestly, you know, we're about 1,000 miles, like here in Juneau, the capital, we're about 1,000 miles north of Seattle. So just to kind of get something to Alaska, you have that distance to overcome. And then, you know, the state itself runs 2,500 miles east to west and 1,500 miles north to south. So, and not very many roads. So it's a lot of, it's basically like islands of communities, and you are either barging or air transferring your goods. Whenever we ask for consulting services, you know, travel is a big piece of that. If somebody has to fly from New York City to get to us, it's, you know, an added expense. So that's probably the biggest thing, but it's you know, there's a lot going on up here. And just figuring out those logistics, I think, is probably the biggest thing that sets us apart from smaller areas around the U.S.
Right. So this is the letter C for conflict, and one of the issues that most people dread is dealing with conflict. So rather than address it head on, what are some steps that you take to avoid it in the first place, either with your team, your customers, or even your suppliers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, usually we find ourselves in a reactive situation, and, you know, there are definitely things we can do to kind of prevent things from boiling up in the first place. And, you know, what I found over the years is clarity and, you know, a high level of communication. Like, you know, over-communicating is hardly ever a bad thing, but under-communicating usually is. You know, it usually works out that way. So as much as you can up front, just say, this is what we're thinking about doing. Explain it in a really clear manner. You know, the more words you use, the more chance there are that somebody's going to misinterpret something or misunderstand something, and that'll cause a conflict. So those two things, you know, those go with the letter C as well, I guess, huh? Clarity and communication. And, you know, just being transparent about what it is you're doing often will help ease that kind of change management that goes with any, you know, decision that you're dealing with. And, you know, one thing I wanted to kind of mention as we looked at internal conflict over the past few years, internal conflict not being like major things, but, you know, where we are a customer service agency and we are providing services to other agencies across the state. One thing that we started kind of taking a look at is, you know, what's one thing, when you tell somebody they're your customer, what's the one thing that they expect? It's that the customer is always right. And as we started kind of digging into that a little bit more, it's not always the case when we're talking about procurement and our agencies. And so we've kind of been trying to transform that line of thinking into, we're not a service agency providing you a service as a customer. We want our agencies to think of us as a strategic partner. We are here to help them. We're here to help them get what they want and what they need, but they also need to trust in us that we are going to make sure that they don't end up in the paper, and that we might be able to find a better way for them to get to where they're going. You know, they might think that this you know, widget that they want to buy is the absolute only thing that will satisfy their needs. But, you know, we deal with widgets statewide every day. We might be able to see something or find something or use our experience to find something that'll help them even better. And so if we change that culture from customer oriented to strategic partner, we are mitigating that. No, gosh darn it, I'm right. This is the only thing that'll work for us. And the more of like, oh yeah, that could also work. What's the cost difference? And turn it into conversations instead of kind of a defensive posture by those agencies.
Right. That's a great philosophy. So when you actually, you had talked earlier about delivery being a huge issue based on where you're located geographically. So if you encounter issues on a contract, and it's primarily with the vendor's delivery of the goods and services, how do you handle that within the scope of work, as well as the customer and supplier expectations? I mean, do you go out to bid again? Do you have sort of wiggle room in changing the scope of work based on delivery issues that you might experience in the state of Alaska?
Yeah, often we will, if it's going to be a major project that involves heavy equipment or just a lot of transporting goods, we will often write it into the contract that we will be responsible for that as the state. So then we will kind of do a complementary freight contract for that specific project. That said, we often, our first ask often will be to bake that into the pricing and see if we can, get if they have a better freight contract or a better freight relationship, and we have access to, we might be able to take a look at that, and then based on that we can decide yay or nay and go out and do our own thing. But it really is going to vary from project to project and kind of what those costs are actually going to be. We've negotiated on many of our smaller commodity contracts, free shipping. We're using cooperative contracts that are nationwide, and we're getting free shipping as a piece of that. And it's worth it for the vendors to make that concession, because they are getting the benefit of all 48 other states volume. And I say 48, right. I don't want to leave out Hawaii, but they're kind of our partner.
Yeah, Sarah Allen would be upset if you left her out.
Yeah, no, the lower 48 is kind of, they're the drivers, and Alaska and Hawaii, we definitely are giving our volume into those contracts, but we're also getting things like free shipping that maybe we wouldn't get on our own.
Right.
So smaller commodity items, typically we can work that way. Larger contracts, we're looking at a separate freight. Maybe they'll pick it up to Seattle, and we pick it up from there, or Long Beach, wherever that nearest point of export is, and then we'll pick it up from there under our own contract.
Sure. So you've been in government a while, and actually you're considered one of the up-and-coming leaders of NASPO. So just in looking, it doesn't have to be just procurement related, but has there ever been a situation where you thought going in, you knew exactly how you were going to handle it, but then once you got in and found out the facts, it became a totally different scenario or solution altogether? Do you have an example or something that's happened? It could be in procurement or just in your management supervision experience.
Yeah, actually, I great example of this. It was years ago. I was a statewide purchaser at the time, and we're a decentralized state as far as purchasing delegations. We have 15 different state agencies, and while the chief procurement officer lays out the statutes and the regulations, or we are kind of influencing what's in statutes and regulations. Individual agencies have their own purchasing delegation to go out and purchase for their own needs, and that just makes sense because of our geographic coverage up here. But we often serve as kind of a call center, I guess, a procurement call center for those decentralized agencies. They'll call us up when they have a protest they're dealing with or whatnot, and ask for advice, and we'll give them that advice from our perspective. And so one day I got a call from one of our agencies, and they said, hey, you know what, we have a bid here, and we can't read it, so what do we do with it? Well, it's non-responsive. If you can't read it, and it would basically take asking them what it says, that's a responsiveness issue, and we wouldn't you have to reject it. And that was the end of that call. And that sounded fine. You know, there were some other things that were mentioned, but it's like, okay, this was the kind of crux of the issue. Let's deal with that, and that was the end of it. About 4 months later, we have an Office of Administrative Hearings here that deals with protests, and I had found myself being called up by one of the admin law judges and asking about things, and like, well, yeah, this agency called, and yeah, they asked that question, and you know, I get this email that had a copy of a protest and a protest appeal and all the decisions, and I'd been named in there.
Oh,
and,
no.
Right. So I answered this question, but it was part of, it was kind of the tip of the iceberg of an entire situation that this agency had run into, where they were running a sealed bid process and were accepting faxes. Before the deadline, they looked at a fax that had come in, noticed it was illegible, asked me about it. I gave them the answer. You know, it's non-responsive, you can't take it. They then called the agency, or the bidder, and said, oh, you know, if we take this, it's going to be non-responsive, so you need to send us a new one. All before the deadline. And, you know, they named me as like being they gave, you know, Jason Soza gave us this advice. So
you're an expert witness.
Right,
it's never good when a judge calls you.
Never. Yep.
Don't answer the phone if the judge is calling.
Yeah, and so from that, you know, I basically learned that kind of need to find out the backstory of a question. Yeah, so why are you asking me this question? That's kind of been our best practice since then.
That's a great story. So as a state CPO, there's many people listening in, but they deal more at the municipal or local level. So being from the state, also an active member in NASPO, can you share the issues and perspective from a state procurement director? And when you're putting contracts in place, what consideration are you having of any local issues during your own contracting processes?
Yeah, you know, we, given our wide geographic expanse up here, we have built a really good practice over, you know, the last 20, 30 years of really involving our local governments and school districts or political subdivisions in our contracts as much as possible. So, you know, any time that we can make a contract available to our political subdivisions, we write in that language, and then we go out and market it to them and say, hey, look, you know, this contract is available. You might be able to do better on your own, but probably not just because of the volume that you're dealing with. Here's a contract that might, you know, be able to save you money and reduce the administrative burden. You won't have to deal with protests, you know, that kind of deal. Lately, we've stepped that up even more and are including them on the front end of our contract. So in the past, we are going out for, you know, the benefit of the executive branch to establish a contract, but we also, you know, pull in and say, hey, political subdivisions, if you want to use this contract, feel free. Now we're actually including them on the sourcing team up front and saying, you know, Municipality of Anchorage, you're, you know, a large political subdivision in the state. Tell us what your volume is. We're going to include you in this contract and help to drive, you know, the cost for all of us down. So I mean, it's a cooperative purchase effort. It's not formalized at this point, but we're really trying to, you know, bridge that gap between state and local governments because it really does benefit everybody.
Right, right. So here's a follow-up question. You don't have a script for this, so I'm just throwing one at you. Is there anything unique that you buy in the state of Alaska that you probably have not heard that the other state CPOs have to even deal with? I mean, I know a lot of them have to deal with snow and ice and other things, but is there anything specific to your region that you have to probably deal with a little bit more or uniquely?
We have a lot of weird one-off stuff, and the best example that comes to mind on that, a couple of years ago, we had a contract to fly wood bison from Anchorage to western Alaska. So there was a wood bison repopulation effort going on, and so we had a C-130
So like bison,
aircraft.
like live animal bison.
Yes, yes.
Wow. Okay.
So we had the young young bison and the females went out on an aircraft, and then all the bulls went out on a train. So we had contracts for both of those, and I just, transporting them 1,000 miles or so, and I'm like, I wonder what other states would ever have to deal with wood bison transport.
Well, thanks.
It was
That's
great.
my weird question.
Yeah.
My other weird question is, when I was in Alaska, they kept trying to sell us bells to keep grizzly bears from eating you, but I don't know if you buy those or not.
No, this is a kind of a local joke, but there's two kinds of, there's multiple bears up here, but the main ones are black bears and brown bears. And if you're walking on the trail, you kind of keep your eye out for bear leftovers that they might leave on the trail as you're walking through. Their bear scat. And so you can tell a black bear it's going to have more berries and things like that in its bear scat that it leaves. And a brown bear is going to smell like pepper spray and have bells in it. So a brown bear will have that. They're the larger bears. So
definitely a local joke.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jason. So I'm going to circle back. Craig, are you still on the line? I've got a question for you.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, so we actually got a shout out for you from Connor Peterson. He said, thanks for the shout out for your organization, SACOG, SACOG. He said they're in attendance and always happy to help. But, you've made the national news, at least in your area of the country, the last couple of days with all the flooding and the rains and the dams. What's going on with you guys as far as collaborating with other municipalities with all of the debris removal and that sort of thing?
So like I mentioned before, SACOG, Connor works with SACOG. They are kind of spearheading the project to get us all together to work on developing a regional debris removal contract. So we've just started that process a couple months ago, but Connor and his group are kind of spearheading that endeavor.
Okay, perfect. And then Harry, back to you. In the whole contracting process, everything from writing specs and scope of work to putting it out on the street to getting those bids in and then handling protests, debriefs, award, all of that, do you feel like there's an element of the contracting process that lends itself to the greatest opportunity for conflict to arise? Is there any one section, you think, or is there just a philosophical part that could make conflict arise? Harry, are you on mute again?
I am on mute again.
Yes. Okay. So is there a part of the process you think that lends itself more to conflict, or?
Well, I think that potentially in not necessarily conflict with a contractor in all instances, but maybe internally. If you don't have a solid procedure in place for a competitive negotiation process with the members fully understanding their role, there are times that you could have an outcome that didn't possibly match a preconceived outcome. That's on the internal side. On the external side, I think that as long as you have a fantastic contract administration plan in place and a solid contract and continue to have that open communication with the contractor, that minimizes the conflict. But if you don't have a good contract administration plan or a good contract administrator to oversee the contract, then there is potential for conflict there as well.
Okay, perfect. So, Jason, I'm going to you on this one. On the legal, since you already brought up a judge, let's give you the legal question. So, heaven forbid that a legal issue arises, but do they tend to be prevalent internal to your organization or external?
They tend. Are you talking about like challenges by vendors or?
Well, and yeah, sometimes it's just interpretation of the law, or do we do it this way? Do we do it that way? Do you have a lot of internal conversations about that?
Usually it's spurred by an external question of something and something we've done, right? So It's typically from vendor. We have a model procurement code, or we've adopted a version of the model procurement code that we've had in place since about 1986, and we've had a few revisions since then. So a lot of times the challenges to it are coming from vendors protesting a decision that we've made and based on an interpretation of a law or regulation that we have, or it'll kind of circle back around through our legislature. A vendor will have an issue with something, and instead of protesting through us, they go through their legislator, and it'll come back to us that way, and then we'll have to kind of go back and re-examine what we've done and how our decision, was it good, or does there need to be clarification to law made? Right. So I would say they end up being internal conversations, but they're triggered by external sources.
Got it. So Craig, I've got a question for you on documentation, because as we know, sometimes this stuff ends up in court. What's the best process that you put in place for documenting conflict or handling issues and making sure everybody covers themselves?
For documenting conflict?
Yeah, or any issues.
That's a good question. If it's a formal process, obviously we document everything, right? Because we're getting some kind of formal conflict that's coming in, and then typically this is going to be like a protest. And we have protest procedures where they've got a certain way that they need to submit their request. Excuse me. And then we'll respond in writing as well. So we're documenting everything in writing and collecting that information too. We have an imaging system where we have all of our documentation, whether it be contracts, correspondences, insurance certificates, etc. We have an imaging system that manages all of our documents. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's good. And we're always saying CYA, write it down somewhere, so that, I mean, as you said, you've just got to have some kind of system for documentation. So I've got to throw one up for all three of you and see if any of you have had this. We have Bruce. Bruce, one of the people in the audience, is asking, has any one of you had an example where you had a protest and then you lost the protest? The contractor was actually correct or right? Because if you guys don't, I had that, and I can answer that question.
Luckily, I have not had that happen.
Okay, and in my case, we had, I used to count them. We had 32 protests while I was purchasing agent. I just, for some reason, kept track of them. And in one case, the contractor was actually correct. We had made an error in some portion of the documentation. We had done something wrong. We had messed up. And so I admitted that we had not done it correctly and ended up throwing the whole thing out, correcting it, and starting all over again. So it was not that it was controversial, but it was one of those projects that needed to be done by a certain time. So it caused the engineers and project manager quite a bit of angst for me to end the whole process and start over again. But to be honest, it was the cleanest way to handle it. And in that one case, the contractor was right. We had messed up. So that, I'm answering that one just because I had that experience.
Yeah, so I had an experience where we didn't get one overturned, but the vendor protested. It was an RFP, right? And so the vendor was protesting their lowest cost solution, but that's not what our basis was awarded for. It was a best value procurement. We were looking at all kinds of things. But so they protested anyway. They protested using our procedures to me. I denied their protest. Kind of explained this was not a low bid. It was an RFP. But the contract actually had to be awarded by our board of supervisors. Right. So I declined their protest. That this is why we're upholding our intent to award to this vendor. So they showed up at the board chambers and still wanted their 15 minutes to kind of plead their case. Ironically, what happened is that discussion that occurred at the board chambers got kind of heated between the incumbent vendor, who was going back to an incumbent, and the vendor that wanted it. They had a lower cost solution, but there are reasons why we didn't feel that was in our best interest. What actually ended up happening, and it was for blood and urine testing services. We actually ended up bringing that service in-house. So everybody, all the vendors lost.
Okay. Took it away from all of them.
Tammy,
Yeah.
Tammy, in Virginia Beach, this was years ago, we did have a construction contractor protest because his bid was deemed late. And unfortunately, at the time, our language wasn't as clear as maybe it could have been. Plus, we didn't have a second hand on our time stamp. So basically, it said all bids were due no later than 2 p.m. Well, the vendor that protested, he was standing there, and he knew that it was certainly at least 2 p.m. and 30 seconds.
Right.
He ended up winning his protest, which in turn we changed the language in Virginia Beach, and it's carried over here in Old Dominion, where we say bids are due no later than 2 p.m. Timestamp 2:01 or later will not be accepted.
Oh, wow. So, okay. You had to get that specific.
So that gets us that extra 59 seconds.
Well, thanks. Well, thanks, gentlemen. So one final thought on this issue called conflict. One would think that our primary responsibility should be about dealing with the actual problem than the emotion surrounding it. However, any problem involves people, and that means there's strong feelings, there's emotions, there's drama, and there's opinions. So from some helpful guides on conflict management, here's some questions to ask yourself to help put it in perspective. 1, how much control do I actually have over this situation? 2, is there anything I can do to alleviate the drama, or are people just going to be unhappy no matter which way this is handled? And then 3, am I putting my energy and emotions into things that I can do or things that I can't do? Only you can answer those questions for yourself. It's tough, I understand, to maintain perspective and a sense of purpose during any conflict. But one good thing about our procurement community, there's always someone who might have a similar circumstance and can help. So don't do this alone. Pick up the phone and call someone in your network for help, for ideas, or just a good old-fashioned therapy session. So in addition to this webinar series, NCPP has created a roadmap to cooperative procurement strategy. Feel free to download a copy from our website, or feel free to email me, Tammy, at tammyrimes.com, and I'll mail out a complimentary hard copy. NCPP is growing with new partners and a recent move to new offices to better support our ongoing operations. Educational materials and meaningful content are in development to help your team in the realm of cooperative procurement. I really want to thank our panelists today for sharing their stories and insight, and to you, the audience, for joining us. This is Tammy Rimes, and I wish you the best as you go forth and procure. Thank you.